When the surgeons opened her, they expected a routine procedure, a simple removal. Nothing unusual. The patient's vitals were steady, the instruments prepared. It was supposed to be another name on another form. But the moment the incision was made, silence fell across the room. Someone dropped a clamp, the monitors hissed, and in the light of the surgical lamp, something inside her shifted. At first, they thought it was a muscle reflex, a twitch of the abdomen. Then, it moved again, slow, purposeful, like something aware of being touched. Every record of that operation would later be sealed. Every photograph, every tape, locked away in a government archive that no one was supposed to open. Yet one file escaped, labeled simply EH 1983. No one could explain what was found inside her body that day. Not the doctors who were there. Not the pathologists who studied it. Some never spoke again. Others left their professions entirely. The official report described it as a parasitic mass, a malformed growth with fragments of hair, bone, and teeth. But those who saw it said it was more than that. They said it moved on its own. Pause. Heartbeat continues faintly. There are photographs, but none were ever released publicly. What remains are whispers, from nurses who were transferred overnight, from families who received unsigned letters, warning them never to speak the name Elena Hart. Her case became legend in small medical circles, a rumor told in late-night conferences, dismissed as exaggeration, or dismissed altogether. But behind those locked drawers and redacted notes, a different picture begins to form. Because if the mass they removed from her wasn't just tissue, if it was something alive, then the question isn't what it was, it's who. Faint static crackles, tape hiss returns. There are documents that suggest Elena had a twin, one that never fully developed, one that should have been absorbed before birth. But the scans from her childhood show no sign of it. It simply wasn't there until it was. Some believe the condition was biological, others that it was something older, something that waited, dormant, until her body became a home. What happened next would be described by one investigator as an event that does not fit within the limits of modern medicine. The file you're about to hear was never meant for the public. Portions of it were retrieved from a decommissioned clinic in northern Maine. No names have been changed, because every person mentioned is already gone. Heartbeat stops abruptly. If she had a twin, no one ever found where it was kept. And yet, sometimes under the hum of the old hospital generators, security guards swore they could hear it. A faint rhythm coming from the walls. A heartbeat, but never just one. Her name was Elena Hart, born February 14th, 1955, northern Maine. According to official records, she lived an ordinary life, quiet, unremarkable. A teacher's aide in a rural primary school. No history of illness, no surgeries, no trauma. But there was always something about her that people remembered, something they couldn't describe. Her colleagues would later say she seemed tired, distracted, like she was always listening for something the rest of them couldn't hear. For years, she kept to herself, lived in a small farmhouse on the edge of town. It had been her parents' home, abandoned for nearly a decade before she returned. Neighbors said she was fixing it up, painting the rooms, planting flowers by the porch. But at night, the lights in her house never went off. A faint hum grows under the narration. The first report came from a neighbor, a man named Richard Bowen. He said he heard something strange one night, a low rhythmic noise coming from Elena's window. He thought it was a generator, but when he mentioned it to her the next morning, she told him there was no generator. He said she smiled when she said it, but her eyes didn't move. Short pause, background sound fades out. Medical records show that in late 1982, Elena began complaining of discomfort, pressure beneath her ribs, nausea, fatigue. The local clinic performed basic tests. Everything came back normal. Her doctor at the time wrote a single note in her file. Patient believes something is moving inside her. No further comment. Soft mechanical click, like papers turning. Within 3 months, she had gained 20 pounds. Within 6, her heartbeat had doubled. 2 rhythms, slightly out of sync. Nurses described hearing it clearly through the stethoscope. One of them, years later, said it was the moment she stopped working in obstetrics altogether. Pause. Elena refused to be transferred to a larger hospital. She said the noise inside her body stopped when she was home. But according to local police records, several neighbors reported seeing her walking the property line at night, barefoot in winter, whispering. No one could make out what she was saying. By spring, her condition had worsened. Bruises appeared around her abdomen in perfect circles, like pressure marks from inside. Doctors suggested a tumor. Elena disagreed. She said something had grown awake. Tape distortion, faint clicking sound. Her last appointment before surgery was on July 9, 1983. The attending physician described her as calm, too calm. He asked her if she'd been sleeping. She said she hadn't slept in months. Then she told him a story. She said when she was a child, her mother told her she wasn't supposed to be alone. That once, during an early ultrasound, doctors thought they saw 2 forms, but one disappeared. Her mother had laughed it off, said it was a shadow. Elena said it was never a shadow. Low hum intensifies slightly. Heartbeat returns faintly underneath. That night, she was admitted for exploratory surgery. No family was notified. Only 3 people were present in the room. 2 of them signed confidentiality agreements that lasted the rest of their lives. The third, the anesthesiologist, never spoke publicly again. All that remains is one surviving note from the procedure log. No date, no time, just 3 words written in pen. It's still moving. Long silence. If the story ended there, it would have been easy to dismiss. A medical anomaly, a strange biological event, explained and forgotten. But the next file in the sequence, the one that should have contained her pathology report, was missing. In its place was a single sheet of paper, blank except for a red fingerprint at the bottom corner. Heartbeat fades out, quiet static builds. And that's where the official story stops. But the truth doesn't. In the months that followed the operation, the small town of Clearfield tried to forget what had happened. The hospital closed its surgical wing. Staff were reassigned. Officially, no record of a patient named Elena Hart existed after July 9, 1983. But she was still alive. Witness accounts place her back at the farmhouse within 2 weeks of her discharge. Bandaged, thin, moving slowly. She told the pharmacist she was healing well, yet those who saw her said she looked different, as if she'd left something of herself on that table and brought something else home instead. Brief pause. Wind rustles leaves. At first, the noises began inside the house, a gentle tapping from the walls, a faint rhythm beneath the floorboards. Friends assumed it was pipes, or wind through the vents. But one night, while visiting, her cousin Anna heard it up close. She described it as a heartbeat, 2, maybe 3, overlapping. When she mentioned it, Elena only smiled and said, "It's quieter when I sleep on my side." After that, no one stayed overnight again. A soft electrical hum fades in, like power lines singing. By autumn, letters began arriving at the local clinic, unsigned, shaky handwriting. Each contained the same question: can something live inside a person if it isn't supposed to? The clinic filed them under anonymous inquiries. But one nurse, Linda Keene, recognized the paper. Stationery sold only at the corner store near Elena's property. She wanted to visit, to check on her. She never did. Sound of faint heartbeat returns, louder now, doubled. Records show the power company received multiple complaints from the same address that winter. Reports of electrical interference, lights flickering, appliances turning on by themselves. Technicians found nothing wrong, yet every time they left, the generator meters would spike for several minutes, as if something in the house was drawing power. Neighbors began to avoid the road that passed by her porch. Dogs refused to enter her yard. Children threw rocks at her mailbox just to hear the echo it made. Pause. On December 18th, 1983, police received a noise complaint at 2:37 a.m. Responding officers described rhythmic pounding that seemed to come from beneath the house. When they knocked, the sound stopped. Elena opened the door, calm, smiling faintly. She told them everything was fine, that she'd been dreaming. But when one of the officers stepped closer, he swore he could still hear it. Soft, muffled, coming from behind her. Long silence. Faint heartbeat continues under narration. The report notes that her pupils were dilated, skin pale, temperature low. She declined further medical help. 2 days later, the same officer filed for transfer. His request was approved immediately. Paper rustle, a page being turned. By January, her condition worsened. The bruising returned, darker now, shaped like perfect arcs along her ribs. She began wrapping her torso in gauze to hide them. In one of the final letters she wrote, "Never sent," she described hearing breathing when she held her breath. She said it was smaller than hers, faster, and that when she tried to press her hand against the sound, something inside pressed back. Heartbeat slows, grows heavier. The last known photograph of Elena was taken by a grocery clerk on a disposable camera. She's standing in line, staring off to the side. Her shirt is lifted slightly, and just beneath the fabric, if you look closely, the outline of a hand seems to press outward, fingertips grazing the surface before disappearing. Silence, faint tape hiss. The photo was never developed properly. The negative burned in the lab's machine the next morning. Pause. Sound of a recorder clicking off, then on again. By the end of that winter, the sound inside her body had grown louder than her own heartbeat. She started sleeping in the cellar, saying the noise upstairs kept her awake. When the snow melted, neighbors noticed something new. Small prints in the mud outside her basement door. Too small to be hers. Too human to belong to anything else. If what the doctors found inside her was truly gone, then what was still moving beneath her skin? By early spring, the local physician, Dr. William Farris, requested that Elena return for evaluation. He noted the bruising pattern was consistent with repeated internal pressure. He recommended an ultrasound. She refused. She said, "It doesn't like the machines. slight hum distortion, like interference. A week later, she collapsed at the post office. Witnesses described her body jerking as if struck from inside. When she was brought to the Clearfield Rural Clinic, nurses reported seeing movement beneath her hospital gown, deliberate, rhythmic, presence from the left side of her abdomen. One nurse fainted, another locked herself in the supply room, and Dr. Faris, a man with 20 years of medical experience, recorded only 3 words in her chart: visible subdermal activity. When questioned later, he refused to elaborate. He said that during the examination, the room temperature dropped suddenly. He said her skin grew cold to the touch, but her pulse, or pulses, did not stop. He performed a scan using the clinic's portable imaging machine. The device was old, analog. The tape should have produced a clean grayscale image. Instead, the footage showed what he described as a secondary mass displaying independent motion. In the upper quadrant of her abdomen, something curled, then extended. The tape was collected by state health officials the next morning. When the clinic requested it back for review, they were told the file did not exist. Over the next 6 days, Elena was kept under observation. No one was permitted to visit. She ate little, spoke less, but the nurses on the night shift swore they could hear breathing, faint, irregular, coming from the corner of her room, even when she was asleep. When they checked, the sound stopped. One orderly described walking past her door and hearing 2 voices. One was clearly hers, the other was softer. He said it sounded like a child repeating every word she spoke, just a fraction of a second late. He quit the next morning. Tape hiss grows louder. The final entry in the clinic log, dated May 22, 1983, reads, "Patient exhibits signs of dual cardiac rhythm. Movements continue without explanation. Recommend transfer. Urgent." The transfer never occurred. That same night, the clinic's power failed for 17 minutes. When the backup generator came online, Elena's room was empty. The door was still locked from the inside. Authorities claimed she had fled, but staff maintained that when they entered the room, her hospital gown lay folded neatly on the bed. The heart monitor was still running, 2 rhythmic lines moving in perfect opposition, one rising as the other fell. 3 days later, a farmer 12 miles away reported seeing a woman walking along the highway at dawn. He said her arms were wrapped around her stomach as if holding something in place. He offered her a ride. She declined. When he asked if she needed help, she whispered, "It's already helping me." That was the last confirmed sighting before the night of the scream. The clinic closed later that year. Every file relating to her admission was transferred to the state archive under restricted access. To this day, those documents remain sealed, but a single X-ray from that week survived, mislabeled, filed under an unrelated patient. It shows a faint, incomplete outline inside the abdominal cavity, a spine, and just above it, the shape of a small clenched hand. It was October 17, 1983, when the first official alarm was raised. Neighbors described hearing a scream, a high, piercing cry, coming from Elena Hart's farmhouse just after midnight. The kind of sound that freezes in your chest, the kind that makes a person step outside barefoot into the cold just to confirm it's real. By the sheer time the police arrived, the scream had stopped, but the silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Officer Paul Henderson later described the scene. The front door was locked. Windows were intact. Inside, the air was cold, unnaturally still, and the living room floor bore marks, depressions in the carpet, as if something inside had pressed against it from beneath. He wrote. The vibrations in the floorboards continued long after entry. It felt as though the house itself was breathing. Elena was found in the cellar, curled on a mattress, arms wrapped tightly around her abdomen. Her eyes were open. She did not speak, but every officer in the room later recalled hearing it, a soft, rhythmic movement inside her body. Not her heartbeat, something else. One officer bent close to the mattress and swore he could hear a second heartbeat, faint but distinct, racing against her own. Pause. Distant, muffled whispering begins under narration. The ambulance crew that arrived moments later noted bruising around her torso, circular marks, deep and dark, no external cause, no explanation. When medical personnel attempted to examine her, she reacted violently. Not anger, not fear, an instinctive protective reflex. She clutched her abdomen as if the thing inside might escape. Heartbeat grows louder for a few seconds, then fades under narration. The police report states that the sound of screaming resumed on the way to the ambulance, not from her mouth, not from the car, but from within. Silence, faint, high-pitched hum lingers. During transport, every monitor in the ambulance malfunctioned. Heart rates fluctuated wildly. Blood pressure readings became erratic. Paramedics reported hearing a faint, childlike cry, a whisper repeating words that only Elena had spoken moments before. Long pause, whispering fades, replaced by soft static. At the hospital, doctors attempted immediate examination. Ultrasound, stethoscope, manual palpation. Nothing prepared them for what they found. Movement, independent movement. And in the brief moments they looked away, the irregularity seemed to respond to their voices. A nurse later described stepping back from the table. It was like something inside her was aware we were watching, and it was deciding when to show itself. That night, security cameras recorded no intrusion. Doors remained locked. Yet the equipment itself seemed to behave as though guided by a presence. Lights flickered, monitors beeped without cause. By morning, Elena was sedated. The hospital administration called the State Health Board. A team of specialists was dispatched to determine the nature of the anomaly. And while they prepared for surgery, one question remained unspoken in every mind. If this was truly a twin, why was it still alive? Why had no one known it existed until now? That night would be documented as the first public acknowledgement that something unexplainable lived inside her. The screams, the second heartbeat, the movement, all corroborated by multiple witnesses. But what followed in the next 72 hours would surpass the ability of science to explain. By late May, a specialized surgical team had been assembled. They arrived under strict orders, no documentation beyond the essential medical logs, no photographs, no unauthorized personnel, and most importantly, no discussion outside the room. The autopsy itself was scheduled for early morning. The attending surgeons entered the operating theater, masks in place, sterile instruments laid carefully on the tray. Long pause, faint clinking of metal on metal. When the incision was made, the first unusual observation was noted immediately. The abdominal cavity contained not one, but two distinct spinal columns. The secondary column was smaller, incomplete, yet unmistakably formed. Its curvature suggested intentional development, not a deformity. One of the surgeons reportedly whispered, "This shouldn't exist. It's alive." Heartbeat returns, slow and irregular, layered softly under narration. Within minutes, the mass, now referred to as the parasitic twin, began to respond to touch. The movement was subtle, a twitch of the fingers, a flex of the limbs. The surgical team paused. The lead surgeon considered halting the procedure, but protocol dictated continuation. Samples were taken. Tissue biopsies, blood swabs, fluid extractions. Analysis would later reveal that while the parasitic twin lacked independent respiratory or circulatory systems, it exhibited distinct electrical activity. Its nerve clusters fired autonomously. It reacted to sound, to light, to pressure. At one point, the lead pathologist noted, "It's coordinating. I can see it coordinating." The team observed minor, almost imperceptible movements in the twins' limbs, curling fingers, shifting shoulders, as if adjusting to stimuli in real time. Heartbeat grows slightly faster. Layered pulse remains beneath narration. One attending refused to continue. He covered his eyes, leaving mid-procedure, claiming he could not reconcile what he was witnessing with medical reality. Another vomited in the adjacent corridor. And yet, the operation proceeded. By the end of the autopsy, the findings were catalogued in a single, heavily redacted report. Officially, the twin was described as fetal tissue exhibiting abnormal persistence and minimal independent reflex activity. But witnesses who had been present described it differently. Fingers that twitched against forceps, small muscle groups that reacted to voices, eye sockets, under light, that seemed to track movements in the room. After the procedure, the parasitic twin was preserved in a sealed container and transported under armed escort to an undisclosed government laboratory. The lead surgeon reportedly said, "It was alive when we removed it, still aware." No follow-up reports were ever released. No further studies were authorized. Years later, documents obtained from the State Archive confirmed that the autopsy tapes had been destroyed. Personnel involved were placed under confidentiality agreements that lasted the remainder of their lives. Yet fragments remained, handwritten notes, partial X-rays, eyewitness statements, and every single one confirmed the same impossibility. This twin had survived inside her. It had responded to stimuli, and when it was removed, it continued to exhibit signs of life. The files end with a single annotation, scrawled in pencil on the margin of one report. "We should never have cut it out." That night, the autopsy room was locked permanently. No further inspections were allowed, and the question that haunted every member of the team remained. If it survived removal, where is it now? By mid-1984, the public record of Eleanor Hart's case had effectively vanished. Files disappeared. Medical records were transferred, misplaced, or simply redacted beyond recognition. Personnel involved in her treatment were reassigned, relocated, or left the field entirely. The hospital wing where the autopsy occurred was decommissioned shortly thereafter. Some claimed the closure was due to budget cuts. Others whispered it was to ensure that no one could reopen the case. Among the remaining fragments was a single envelope, discovered years later in the private archive of a retired nurse. Inside were handwritten notes, observations, dates, unusual occurrences. They described 2 distinct heart rhythms in the same body, bruising patterns forming precise arcs, small repeated movements beneath the skin, auditory phenomena, whispers, breathing, soft knocking. But when researchers attempted to cross-reference these notes with official files, nothing existed. It was as if the entire medical record had been erased. In 1985, a private investigator hired by a local journalist received a single phone call. A voice, unrecognizable, said only, "Stop asking. It's not gone. It's waiting." The investigator later claimed the line went dead before he could respond. Every attempt to access the autopsy report through official channels returned the same result. File missing. Access restricted indefinitely. Even photographs of Elena's X-rays, those that hinted at the parasitic twin, had been removed from archives. One technician reported that an envelope labeled X-ray EH 1983 had been retrieved from storage and burned in a furnace. No one knew who ordered it. Over the next decade, researchers who tried to follow up on the case encountered similar barriers. Emails never delivered, requests denied, interviews with witnesses cancelled at the last minute. And those who pressed too hard reported receiving warnings, anonymous, brief, and chilling. Some things are not meant to be found. By 1993, the case of Elena Hart had become almost myth. Small mentions in Ibn Esp's medical journals were cryptic, references erased from public databases. Yet whispers persisted from retired nurses, lab technicians, and local law enforcement. They spoke of files, locked cabinets, and coded logbooks, of specimens moved under armed escort, and of a single word repeated by those who had seen the twin during autopsy: alive. Every effort to reconstruct the events surrounding her life and the autopsy led to dead ends. Evidence that could confirm or deny the reality of what lived inside her simply vanished. And yet, scattered fragments hint at a larger truth, one the public may never see. Some files remain in private hands, some photographs survive in partial negatives. Some voices, retired, frightened, still speak of the night she screamed. But the most troubling detail of all, the parasitic twin was never accounted for. Not in storage, not in official reports, not in any record accessible to the public. Where it went, who holds it, and whether it continued to live outside the body of Elena Hart remains unknown. Elena Hart survived the night the hospital could not explain. She returned to her farmhouse, alone. Officially, her case ended with the autopsy, but for her family, the story was far from over. Her mother, Margaret Hart, later recounted in fragmented interviews, portions redacted, voices altered, that she always suspected something was different about Elena. She described her daughter as quiet, withdrawn, not unusual for a child in rural Maine. But from an early age, Elena would place her hand over her abdomen and listen intently, murmuring words no one could hear. At night, she claimed to feel someone else moving beneath her skin. Her mother dismissed it at first as imagination, until the bruises began. Margaret said she first heard the second heartbeat through the wall when Elena was 13, a rhythmic pulsing, faint but insistent, coming from her bedroom. It was not a machine. It was not her own. And for the first time, Margaret feared for her daughter. Years later, her sister Anna would describe similar events. Objects moving slightly when Elena was present. Doors closing with no wind. Whispers in the night, repeating words she had just spoken. Neighbors confirmed odd occurrences. Dogs refusing to enter the property. Footprints in the mud, small, childlike, leading nowhere. A figure glimpsed in the distance, staring from behind the trees, only to vanish when approached. Elena herself left fragmented notes. She wrote of feeling watched from within, of hearing a second heartbeat that spoke in rhythm with her own, of something that needed her attention, needed her body, yet depended entirely on her survival. She said, "It knows me, I know it. We are tied, but I am not free." Even after she left the hospital, the phenomenon persisted. Visitors who stayed in the farmhouse for more than a night reported unusual sensations. Pressure on the torso while sleeping, soft rhythmic tapping in walls, faint breathing where none should exist. Pause, distant faint echo of childlike giggle, subtle, almost imperceptible. Elena's family tried to intervene. They called physicians, therapists, clergy. No one could explain it. No one could alter it. And as time passed, her isolation grew. The second heartbeat remained, persistent. The bruising never completely faded. The whispers continued, soft, unending, and ever-present. Heartbeat layered beneath narration, slightly faster, low tape hiss. In every account, one question lingered. If something survived within her, for decades, how much of her was still Elena, and how much belonged to something else entirely? Long pause, wind fades, heartbeat slows. The fragments we now possess suggest only one certainty. She survived, yes, but the entity within her did not end with her survival. This is the woman they could not explain, the one who carried something no one else could see, the survivor and the host. In 1987, a researcher named Dr. Malcolm Reyes began investigating anomalies in human development. He specialized in rare congenital conditions, with a particular focus on parasitic twins. Elena Hart's case had reached him through obscure channels, whispers, redacted notes, fragments of reports. Nothing official, nothing complete, but enough to spark his curiosity and concern. Dr. Reyes kept a private journal. The entries later recovered are meticulous. Dates, observations, references to medical journals, hospital logs, all cross-referenced to build a timeline. In one entry, he writes, "Subject exhibits extraordinary persistence, parasitic tissue, alive and responsive beyond known biological limits. Movement observed independent of host. Electrical impulses suggest sensory awareness." He began compiling other cases, rare scattered reports across continents. Infants with abnormal tissue formations exhibiting reflexes independent of the host. Children with dual heart rhythms documented but never explained. Patients whose internal mass seemed to react to speech, light, or touch. All parallels to Elena's case. In his next entry, Dr. Reyes describes a night spent in Elena's old farmhouse. The house had long been abandoned, but he was drawn by reports from neighbors, faint sounds, unexplained movements, impressions of something alive inside the walls. He writes, "I set up sensors in the basement. Ambient recordings captured irregular patterns, resembling twin cardiac rhythms, not mechanical, not explained by natural phenomena. Something inside still exists, something aware." Dr. Reyes began hypothesizing. He suggested that the parasitic twin, once removed, might retain limited awareness, that it could persist outside the host under certain conditions, and that in rare cases, the tissue could continue responding to stimuli. Intelligence, in some rudimentary form, surviving extraction. He documented encounters with colleagues. Some dismissed him, some avoided him. A few refused to speak after seeing the evidence he had collected. One scientist, reviewing his recordings, reportedly said, "If what you've captured is real, it changes everything we know about parasitic twins." Dr. Reyes continued his journal for years. He connected Elena's case to a small number of global anomalies. Notes referenced Japan, Northern Europe, South America. Isolated reports of individuals with internal masses exhibiting reflexive, purposeful movement. Heartbeat slows, soft static hiss. His final entry reads, "The tissue appears to possess awareness. It responds to observation. It adapts. If this persists, if it survives outside the body, then containment is imperative. Questions remain: how, why, and where?" The journal vanished shortly after his death. No copies remain. No explanation for its disappearance. Only fragments recovered from private collections and second-hand witnesses. What Dr. Reyes documented suggests something that cannot be ignored. The parasitic twin was more than biological tissue. It was aware. It persisted. And its influence, however limited, may have extended beyond the body of Elena Hart. After Elena Hart vanished from the hospital, the farmhouse remained. Empty, abandoned, yet alive with the residue of what had occurred inside its walls. Neighbors reported strange occurrences almost immediately. Footsteps on the porch at night. Lights flickering in rooms where no electricity flowed. Soft whispers, not words, but patterns, repeating in rhythm with faint, twin-like heartbeats. One local police officer, years later, recalled a visit to the property. The front door was unlocked. Inside, dust covered every surface, yet floorboards bore depressions, small, deliberate, like someone or something had been pacing. When he placed his hand on the staircase, he said he could feel a pulse, subtle, distinct, and not his own. A retired neighbor, Anna Mitchell, described hearing the second heartbeat through the walls one night in spring. She said it followed the pattern of human breathing, then slowed, then stopped, only to begin again moments later. When she called out, the sound ceased immediately. She swore it waited. And when she left, the sound resumed as if mocking her absence. Dr. Malcolm Reyes, years after his initial research, attempted to monitor the house with equipment left behind by Elena's family. Sensors recorded irregular patterns, two distinct cardiac rhythms, overlapping but not identical. Slight movements in floorboards and walls, detectable only by sensitive motion detectors. Weak but consistent electrical discharges in areas untouched by power. All indicators suggested that something remained. Something small, alive, and still attached to the house in ways that defied biology. In one report, Reyes notes, "It seems aware of observation. It reacts. Its rhythms change when approached. It persists independently of its former host." Attempts to remove or contain the presence were unsuccessful. Every sensor, every device malfunctioned or produced incomplete readings. The house itself seemed to resist scrutiny, responding only when someone was present to notice. Long pause, faint echo of footsteps, irregular heartbeat slows. By the 1990s, the property was considered off-limits. Authorities cited structural hazards. Neighbors spoke only in hushed tones. Stories of twin heartbeats, whispers, and minor poltergeist-like activity persisted. No one dared enter for long, yet scattered traces remain. Old photographs, faint impressions in plaster, and recollections of those who lived nearby. Soft wind hum, heartbeat fades to near silence. The house endured, a silent witness. It heard two hearts, one human, one unknown, and it waited. By 1995, nearly everyone connected to Elena Hart's case had vanished from public records. Doctors retired quietly. Nurses left town. Investigators were reassigned. And yet, one witness remained. The person who saw, heard, and felt the presence of the parasitic twin more closely than anyone else. Her name was Linda Keene, a nurse who had worked the night shifts at the Clearfield Rural Clinic. She observed the twin during Elena's hospital stays. She heard the second heartbeat. She felt the subtle movements beneath the skin. Years later, in a private interview, she described the night that haunted her for the rest of her life. It was like the body was two rhythms, two wills. I placed my hand on her abdomen, and it responded. Not Elena. Something else. Heartbeat faint, a faster secondary pulse layered beneath narration. Linda recalled the autopsy. She had been asked to leave the room before it began. But she remembered what the surgeons whispered afterward. Alive. It was alive. And she remembered the warning. Don't speak of this. Ever. Linda spoke of subtle signs she alone noticed. The pattern of bruising, almost deliberate in shape. The way the secondary heartbeat synchronized briefly with observers' own pulses. The tiny, imperceptible twitches under Elena's skin, often timed with words spoken near her. Soft scratching sound, like notes being taken. Heartbeat layered beneath narration. She recalled the day the hospital room went dark during a storm. All equipment malfunctioned, all monitors failed. And then, the heartbeat, two distinct lines, continued on the defunct monitors. The second line, faint, irregular, but undeniably present. Linda fled the profession shortly after. She left town. But she said she could never escape the sound. Pause, heartbeat slows, then faint whisper-like hum begins. She described it as following her. Not physically, not consciously. But the rhythm remained in her mind. A memory of something alive, aware and dependent on observation. Her testimony is the last first-hand account we have, and it suggests a horrifying possibility. The parasitic twin, removed from Elena, may not have perished. It may persist, somewhere, waiting. The files end here. No further witness accounts exist. No official documentation explains the twins' current state or location. And yet the question remains, unanswered and unavoidable. If it survived removal, if it continues to exist, how much of Elena Hart truly lived, and how much belonged to something else entirely? Years passed, decades in fact. The name Elena Hart faded from the public consciousness. The farmhouse decayed. The hospital wing was demolished. Yet fragments of the case persisted. A faint pulse in the record, whispered stories, partial photographs, and eyewitness testimonies. Dr. Malcolm Reyes's journal, though partially destroyed, suggested that the parasitic twins' biological activity might continue under certain conditions. Small, independent electrical impulses, autonomous movement in tissue, responses to auditory and visual stimuli. Linda Keene, the last surviving witness, noted in her private journals that the sensation of twin heartbeats would occasionally return. Not in her body, but in her mind. A rhythm she could feel when alone. A pulse she could not explain. Neighbors in Clearfield still report strange occurrences near the old farmhouse. Lights flicker in abandoned rooms. Dogs refuse to enter the yard. Occasional whispers are heard through the wind. One retired police officer described walking past the property at dusk. I thought I heard two hearts, two distinct rhythms. It stopped when I stepped closer, only to start again when I left. I've never heard anything like it before or since. The files we have, incomplete as they are, suggest one terrifying possibility. The parasitic twin may no longer reside inside Eleanor Hart's body, but it may not be gone. It may persist somewhere in some form, aware and waiting. Some researchers theorize that under rare circumstances, parasitic tissue can retain limited neural activity. Others claim these are anomalies too extraordinary to comprehend. Yet, when the eyewitnesses, the surviving notes, and the fragments of recordings are considered together, a pattern emerges: awareness, persistence, adaptation. Eleanor Hart's story is unfinished. Her life ended, yes. Her twin was removed, yes. But the legacy, the echo of what survived, endures. And it leaves one question. If something once lived inside her and survived, if it can react, observe, and adapt, is it still waiting somewhere, ready to interact again? The trail of Eleanor Hart's case narrows to fragments. Redacted files, destroyed tapes, and personal notes are all that remain. Yet even in their incompleteness, they tell a story of something extraordinary. A presence, aware and persistent, that defied medical explanation. Among the surviving documents are partial autopsy logs, notes detailing the parasitic twins' movement, reflex responses, and independent nerve activity, mentions of fingers curling when exposed to light, muscles twitching in response to sound, hospital shift reports. Multiple staff reported hearing a secondary heartbeat. One nurse noted that it slowed when she whispered near Eleanor, as though the presence could hear and respond. Redacted correspondence. Letters between Dr. Reyes and colleagues hint at concern over containment and observation. It reacts. One note reads, "It is aware of being observed. Must proceed with caution." Heartbeat grows slightly faster. Layered, subtle second pulse beneath narration. Even the partial X-rays, preserved in private hands, reveal anomalies. A second spinal column. A hand-like formation pressing outward beneath the ribcage. Structures that suggest development beyond mere tissue. Pause, soft wind and tape hiss. A final report, heavily censored, describes an unexpected finding. Electrical activity persists post-removal. Observed reflexive responses independent of host. Further study required. Subject may survive outside body. Heartbeat slows. Faint mechanical click of tape recorder. These records, though fragmented, indicate that the parasitic twin was not merely a biological anomaly. It was something that could react, adapt, and perhaps persist beyond Elena's life. Witness statements corroborate the strange phenomena. Neighbors heard 2 heartbeats from the abandoned farmhouse. Investigators reported objects moving without cause. Linda Keene, the last surviving witness, documented the sensation of twin heartbeats lingering in her own body, even years later. Heartbeat layered subtly beneath narration. Low hum continues. The records end abruptly. No further documentation exists, no explanation, and no trace of the parasitic twin in official custody. The final question remains: if it survived removal, if it persists in some form, is it still aware, watching, waiting for the next observer to notice it? Even after Eleanor Hart disappeared from public view, the echo of her case persisted. Those who had witnessed her condition reported sensations that could not be explained. 2 rhythms, intertwined yet distinct. 2 presences, one visible, one concealed. Linda Keene, the last surviving witness, described the phenomenon as a rhythm that never stops. She said that even in quiet moments, she could sense it. The second heartbeat, faint but insistent, like a shadow of awareness. It would quicken if she thought of Elena. It would slow if she ignored it, and it would vanish entirely when others entered the room, as if aware of observation. Heartbeat subtly layered, faint whispering begins in background. Neighbors spoke of hearing dual heartbeats from the abandoned farmhouse. Not together, but offset, one slow, one fast. Not in sync with any living person, and not detectable by conventional instruments. One retired officer recalled, "I stood at the edge of the property. I could feel it. 2 hearts, 2 rhythms. One living, one, I don't know, something else. Soft tape distortion. Heartbeat grows faintly faster. Low wind hum." Dr. Reyes's notes suggested a terrifying possibility. The parasitic twin may persist in a form that is partially independent of a host, responsive, aware, and capable of subtle interaction. And yet, without the constraints of a body, it remains largely hidden, existing in patterns, echoes, and traces that only sensitive observers might perceive. The echo of 2 hearts is more than metaphor. It is reported as a sensation, a presence, a rhythm that mirrors life and something beyond life. Those who have encountered it, directly or indirectly, describe fear, awe, and the unshakable certainty that something intelligent endures, not in the living body of Elena Hart, but somewhere still, in the quiet spaces she left behind. The echo continues. It resonates in walls, in memories, in records, and in the minds of those who paid attention. A reminder that not all life ends when the body does. Not all presences vanish with removal or distance. In the years following the removal of Elena Hart's parasitic twin, attempts to study it became heavily restricted. Official channels closed, files were redacted, laboratories were locked. Yet whispers persist of researchers who conducted unauthorized observations. Dr. Malcolm Reyes's journal, partially recovered, details one such instance. Sensors placed near the specimen indicate independent movement. Reflexes persist in response to stimuli. Attempts to isolate electrical activity from background noise largely unsuccessful. Observation recommended under strict protocol. Avoid prolonged exposure. Observers reported strange phenomena during these sessions. The twins' tissue reacting to sound, fingers curling, limbs twitching, reflexive movements that corresponded with voices in the room. Electrical impulses detectable, even when the twin was separated from living tissue. One anonymous scientist wrote, "It behaves as if aware, as if it understands. Conventional biology cannot explain this." Pause, faint whispering, like syllables repeating indistinctly. Attempts to stimulate the twin were limited. Direct contact caused unusual reactions. Temperature fluctuations, sudden equipment malfunctions, faint sounds akin to breathing or whispering. Witnesses recalled an overwhelming sensation, the feeling of being observed in return. These experiments were halted under strict orders. The twin was deemed too unpredictable, too aware. Yet traces of these observations persist. Partial lab reports, redacted video footage, faint electrical recordings, anecdotal notes from researchers who refused to speak on record. Long pause, soft tape hiss, distant wind through cracked windows. The conclusion reached by the few who dared study it. The entity is not inert. It adapts. It reacts. It may be aware of its observers. Further interaction is forbidden. Heartbeat slows, low hum fades, faint whispering almost inaudible. Even after decades, The forbidden observation remains unfinished. Those who attempted it never fully understood what they were observing. And the parasitic twin, removed, preserved, yet still alive in some form, continues to elude definitive study. The last confirmed sighting of Elena Hart's parasitic twin occurred in the late 1990s. By then, almost all personnel involved in the original case had retired or disappeared. The hospital records were redacted. The farmhouse had fallen into decay. Yet the twin, or something derived from it, appeared to remain. The witness, a retired laboratory technician known only as Samuel Wren, reported an unusual delivery to the government laboratory where the twin had been preserved. According to Samuel's account, the specimen, it moved. It was preserved, but there was a subtle, deliberate motion. Fingers flexed, limbs shifted. It was small, yes, but there was awareness. Samuel claimed that during the observation, the twin reacted to sound. A whisper in the room caused it to retract slightly. A raised voice made it curl and twist. When the lights were dimmed, it became still. But the heartbeat pattern, faint and irregular, persisted. He noted that the twin seemed to respond specifically to human attention. It was as though it recognized observation itself, anticipating movement, listening, and reacting. In his journal, Samuel wrote, "I cannot describe it fully. It is not conscious in the human sense, yet it behaves with intent. Every reaction feels deliberate. I saw it. I cannot unsee it." The twin was removed from the observation room shortly thereafter. The location where it was placed afterward is unknown. All further records of its presence vanished. Cameras, sensors, and logs, everything ceased. Yet those who had witnessed it claimed the same chilling realization. It survived removal from Elena Hart. It retained limited awareness. It could respond to observation, even decades later. Heartbeat slows, faint wind hum. And the final haunting question remains. If it is still alive, somewhere, responding to the presence of others, how long before it is noticed again? Decades have passed since Elena Hart's case first captured the attention of scientists, witnesses, and investigators. Yet the mystery remains unresolved. The parasitic twin, removed, preserved, and observed, has vanished from all official records. No confirmed sightings exist. No public evidence remains. And yet, reports continue to surface. Neighbors in Clearfield and nearby towns speak quietly of strange phenomena. Faint heartbeats in abandoned houses, shadows moving against walls where no one stands, objects shifting without cause, whispers repeating words that were spoken moments before, heartbeat faintly layered beneath narration, second irregular pulse almost imperceptible. Some claim these events are connected to Elena Hart's twin. Others dismiss them as coincidence, imagination, or residual trauma. But one pattern persists. Wherever attention is paid to the old farmhouse, or to records connected to Elena, unusual activity seems to follow. Private researchers have attempted to track the twins' potential movements. Data remains inconclusive. Equipment fails in unexplained ways. Signals appear briefly, then disappear. And eyewitnesses report an unsettling sensation, the feeling of being watched, of rhythms echoing against their own heartbeat. Even those with indirect exposure report effects, dreams influenced by twin-like pulses, faint auditory impressions of two heartbeats. The impression that something is aware, waiting, observing. Dr. Malcolm Reyes' early hypotheses remain unverified. Yet modern analysis of recovered notes suggests a terrifying possibility. The twin may persist independently of a host, aware, reactive, and bound to the spaces and people it has touched. The ongoing mystery raises questions no one has answers to. Where is it now? How aware is it? Does it respond to the living, or merely to those who observe? And what will happen when it is noticed again? Over the years, fragments of documentation regarding Elena Hart and her parasitic twin have surfaced, but only in hidden, private collections. Files that were removed from official archives, reports never released to the public, redacted pages, handwritten notes, and lab logs stored in private safes. Pause, soft rustle of paper, faint low hum continues. Among the recovered documents are unsettling details. Observation logs describing subtle reflexes in the twin, even after removal from Elena's body. Electrical recordings showing independent activity, suggestive of awareness. Photographs of tissue samples with movements captured between frames, difficult to explain biologically. One private note reads, "Specimen responds to observation. Reflexive activity persists outside host. Cannot confirm limits of awareness. Restricted access required." Some files hint at experiments that were never authorized, attempts to stimulate the twin with light, sound, and touch. Results were sporadic. Responses were inconsistent but undeniably deliberate. Small twitches, slight curling of fingers, shifts in muscle groups. A former technician claimed that after exposure to one observation session, he felt a persistent heartbeat in his own chest, faint, separate from his own pulse. He described it as invasive, conscious, and aware. A rhythm that seemed to follow him, responding to his thoughts and movements. Other hidden files suggest that the parasitic twin may have influenced its environment subtly. Minor electrical disturbances, malfunctions in monitoring equipment, sensations perceived by observers, as if it could project awareness beyond its physical tissue. The files end abruptly. No explanation is given for how the tissue could survive removal, or whether it retains a form of consciousness. No indication of its current location exists. What these hidden files suggest is chilling. The twin may not only survive outside its host, it may perceive, it may interact, and it may remain somewhere, waiting to be observed again. By the late 1990s, researchers and witnesses began to recognize a pattern. The parasitic twin was not inert. It was not passive. It appeared capable of observation. Pause, faint scratching of notes being taken. Low hum continues. Dr. Malcolm Reyes's recovered journals suggest that the twin could react to awareness itself. It responded to attention. It paused when watched. It twitched or shifted when left unobserved. A presence that adapted to human scrutiny. Heartbeat layered beneath narration. Faint secondary irregular pulse begins. Witnesses describe the sensation as subtle, yet undeniable. A shift in the air when someone entered a room. A faint heartbeat echoing that did not belong to any living body. Whispers, soft and indistinct, almost as if it were repeating syllables overheard. Linda Keene, the last surviving nurse, described feeling it following her, even after leaving the hospital. It wasn't in the room, not physically, but I could feel it, always aware, watching, reacting, waiting. Pause, faint wind, low hum continues. Observers conducting unauthorized studies reported similar experiences. Reflexive reactions in preserved tissue, electrical impulses that defied natural explanation, subtle movements synchronized with observers' own gestures. One private log reads, "Subject appears aware, independent responses to stimuli observed. possibly perceives observer intent, cannot determine limits of perception. Heartbeat grows slightly faster, whispering layered faintly beneath narration. Even in absence, the twin seemed capable of interacting with the environment indirectly. Equipment malfunctioning without physical cause, anomalous readings in monitoring devices, sensations in observers consistent with the heartbeat and movement of the twin. Pause, heartbeat slows, faint tape, hiss, soft ambient wind. The implication is unsettling. The twin may no longer require Elena's body to persist. It may continue to observe. It may remain aware of those who study, watch, or even speak about it.